Hello and welcome to another 10 Plus Club on businessesforsale.com, where I interview business owners who have successfully run their business in excess of 10 years. And today I'm talking to Barny Macaulay, who has been running The Barn, a digital e-commerce agency. How are you?
Hi, Marcus. I'm great today, thanks, and very nice to meet you.
And let me get this right before we get into the nitty gritty of how you've successfully run a business for more than 10 years. What does the barn do? I've got a kind of rough idea that you're e-commerce specialist for quite established brand names. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, I could tell you the sort of history of it, but it's developed into direct to consumer e-commerce. I mean, I'm going to say support, but we basically clients will come to us, and what I think we've built out as a what was a niche, although I think it gets, there are lots of agencies out there, was that we're very good at understanding brand in e-commerce. And historically, e-commerce has been sort of quite a dry subject around transaction and sort of user experience, customer experience. And we really tried to bring brand into that and brand experience into that and sort of try and put a bit that soul into our digital work. So in a nutshell, it's websites, it's e-com, and helping businesses sell their product online.
Yeah, but and that's interesting because what I noticed when I looked at your website was just a who's who list of brands: luxury, fashion, beauty, hotels. And I was actually flabbergasted that, and I know you're right, everyone talks about web agencies. And the first thing that occurred to me was that clearly what you've done is you've satisfied the client's need for the spirit of their brand to be reflected online, which is probably the underrated skill, correct?
Yeah, I'd say so, actually. I mean, that's a really interesting point because I feel, whenever you're taking on a project, there's two things going on. There's the delivery of the brief, but there's also the connection with the client and understanding that client and understanding what that client's needs are. And that can come from like loads of things. It could be, they need to get home on time because they've got a young baby, or it could be like they're in their first 2 months and there's a bit of tension with the creative director, or there's something. And so it's kind of like navigating that to make sure that we're all about sort of educating to empower the client. So it's all about like unlocking the potential, not just of the project, but the individual that you're working with. I mean, that sounds like kind of, I don't know if that sounds patronizing, but it's kind of like more, helping them to sort of unlock their own role. And I
And I think
think
you
when you're working,
sorry, I was going to
yeah,
sorry to
go
jump
on.
in because the one thing I noticed was that you kind of go, look, Shopify does everything that you need to do for what you
Yeah.
need. And so you're unashamedly saying, let's move you onto Shopify, uh, or let's use Shopify to do the delivery, to do the mechanics, because an agency to go and build what Shopify would do would probably end up charging the client many hundreds of thousands of pounds. And what you're saying is, well, there's already a mechanism to do that. So why reinvent the wheel and let us focus on the more important things, which is what you're describing now. Is that roughly right?
Yeah, 100%. And I guess, I use the analogy that Shopify or building a website, building an ecom website is like choosing a kitchen. And if you go into Shopify, you can find people who are like, well, I know in their mind's eye, they have a sense that Shopify is an easy, cheap solution. And there's you can search for the results on around Shopify and say, build your site in 2 days. And so there's that world, but then there's also a world of, people who want the seamless cloud solution of that, but they want to actually invest their budget in brand and design and experience. And if you're a luxury hotel, you want something, we talk in our world a lot about omnichannel and about getting that online and offline feeling like sort of seamless, which means it's really all about the design. It's really all about that story and connecting the emotional side of it rather than trying to firefight a plugin in a dev PHP sort of like black hole. So yeah, all of that world, which I know that you've worked in digital yourself as well, Marcus, and that around sort of late 90s and early 2000s, you'd be up at like 12 o'clock on a Sunday, ready to turn the switch to push something live, and the whole thing could explode, and you just didn't know, and everybody was terrified. And luckily, those days are gone. So you can spend more time on marketing and growth potential and less time firefighting, which really plays into I guess, my background, which was originally advertising and marketing as an art director. So it took away that stress and burden of deep dev and much more on like opportunity and growth.
Did you? I mean, I'm fascinated by this because everybody's quite, they always, a lot of clients, I imagine, or a lot of people in business want to own every bit of their technology. Did you ever struggle convincing these incredible, I mean, the list of brands is quite stunning. Did you ever struggle to convince these clients? Was that part of the pitch, convincing them to use something like Spotify at the beginning? Because I imagine a lot of sort of people who are employed by these companies to do the e-commerce, to do the internet, would have been quite resistant to that because they just think, oh, that's my budget gone. You know what I mean? Did you ever have that
Well,
struggle?
again, it's a really, really interesting, development. I mean, certainly for, the barn has sort of three chapters. And in the first iteration, so we've been going for 12 years, and the first 4 years is a lot about finding out what you are and how you want it to work. And at that time in tech, you would have a budget coming from, you'd have basically a kind of a marketing director and a technical director at lockerheads of what, you know, who's paying for what and what does good look like. And it was yourself somewhere in between, sort of like between the battlefield, just sort of like taking the crossfire. I think what we decided quite early on that we didn't really want like huge RFPs, which I'm sort of talking like 300-400 grand jobs where you really do move into sort of very tech integration work. And we were looking for faster moving iterative projects which had a more, well, I guess the ecom manager is it's less of an institution. Like it's not a John Lewis job, you know. So and I think we understood where our sweet spot was on a budget project and where to say no. And I think, as I said at the beginning, it's like we didn't want to go too low, but we also didn't want to go too high. I mean, I've worked in tech a lot for probably the last 20 years, and I've seen, somebody walk in and go, I've just won £1 million job. And then after like a year and a half, it's cost them 1.2 to get it done. And it's just like you're just burning money on trying to fix and making things happen. And it felt to me there's no fun in that. And it's not good for anybody's health. So we were very clear about what our sweet spot was, and we've been very, very lucky. With our line of work, you're doing e-com jobs, but sometimes you're also building tools like a personalization tool for a jewelry brand, or some kind of customization system, or sometimes it's rich content and videos. So it's quite flexible in what we're offering. But yeah, certainly we avoid the really big stuff, and we avoid the small stuff. We've kind of got this little
And
channel in the middle.
and I think that knowing what you are as a business and going for it is obviously the sort of foundations for most business owners and the success of their businesses. How have you how does your company work with other members of staff? Like, do you have a big team, a small team? Is it a loose confederation of creative freelancers that you then go and use regularly to bring in? What's the kind of structure of your
Yeah,
company?
it's a balancing act because you in those three cycles that I've built teams up to 30, which was almost, I felt like that's what good looked like to me in my mind. I felt like, a nice big team. It felt like I was making it happen. And after COVID, it was like, no, I want a small team and I'm outsourcing everything. And there's always been this balancing act of, in my line of work, I'm doing a beauty brand, or and that might be a certain designer, and I'm doing a kind of men's fashion leather brand is definitely a very different designer. And you've got to have that black book. You can't just put somebody says they're a designer on that job. They need to have a sensitivity if it's going to be the DNA of your business. And when you're in the service industry like I am, it's all about people, skill set, and knowledge. And I can't actually spread, or myself and the senior team, Phil and Anthea and those, we can't spread ourselves so thin, to have. So we've always sort of felt like we need to be quite a compact unit of consultancy that gives very strong strategic advice, and then we keep everybody. There's a practical reason of keeping people off the books
And
for me
that, and
too, because I just don't feel the pressure.
I suspect
Don't want
that
the
comes
pressure
from
anymore.
your advertising agency background, that whole concept of strategy, which is very rarely discussed. You always think of advertising as account management and creative, but there's that third unit, which is strategy, which drives the agency. So is that something that you've brought in from the agency into your company? That idea of
I think
strategy?
so, definitely. Yeah, I think so, definitely. I think that the feedback that we get from clients is they like our understanding of brand and our strategic position on how that strategic insight. And often, again, in ecom, you're very tactical. You're like, I need this many sales tomorrow, and how am I just doing things on a daily basis? And you're just trying to shovel coal in the fire to keep the engine going. And sometimes I'm very aware that there are moments when you need to do it, no less more than now going into Christmas. But equally, you want to be kind of going, your ecom performance is a bit like a stock price, and it's always going to go a bit like this. So you can't get too stressed if it's going down, but you want to just make sure you're getting a bit of a hockey. So what are we doing for the year, and how are we delivering our brand message to people to keep the brand sticky, to get people coming back, and all. So just trying to think in that sort of more long-term way is and coming up with really trying to think about points of difference in often quite a saturated space, and a very compact space of like 40 seconds of someone's time. And can you even be strategic when you've got 40 seconds of someone's time? And yet you need to be, you really need to work out it's how you're going to keep that connection. So yeah, I think I love doing that bit, and it's served us well.
And is that something you do in conjunction
If
with
that
the
answers
market?
the question, I'm not sure. Did I
No,
answer the
it's no,
question
it's
there,
a
Marcus?
really
I hope
good
so.
answer. It's a great answer because it gives you an insight into the mindset of how the business is, like what is ticking the boxes for you as a business owner. Uh, some people just, it's like me and my brother running businesses for sale.com. We are fascinated about things that people might not even consider. Like we're obsessed with how businesses are valued. And,
Yeah.
it's a kind of constant conversation. And
Maybe you can value mine. One.
well, I mean, it's a real. I mean, I think different business sectors have different valuations, and I think I don't know whether do you are you on are most of your clients on a contract with you?
Yeah, we have. So I'm trying. I mean, all I ever read in my line of work is that, you're really only buying the founders, and it's hard to put a true value on what you're doing because your product is your service is the individuals. And so we have, in the last 4 or 5 years, we've definitely got a lot more clients working on retainers, building long-term relationships. We start building out our own tools and IP to give ourselves more value. And
I mean, sorry to cut across, the
yeah,
trick
of course.
of selling any business actually, and this is what we this is the constant conversation, and even with myself, with my brother and I, we're a certain age where we think, well, what is the exit, what is the end game here, and not just to think for yourself like what's good for you, but all your employees, your customers, your suppliers. There needs to be some kind of continuity, and the advice that I've taken absolutely to heart is make oneself redundant within the business as a business owner. Um, I do it better than my brother, to be honest. It's like I'm kind of obsessed with making myself redundant. Basically, what I want to be is the idiot chairman of the company that walks around, goes, so what is it that you do? Oh,
Yeah.
isn't that amazing? Oh, we've got computers. Oh, you want to be that idiot. I know he's a bit of a stereotype, but for me, that's a sign of a good business that's very buyable by anyone because it means you don't need the idiot chairman. You're just buying the business. Whereas
Yeah.
if the owner is, and we use this as the hair salon analogy when our business is for sale, and I know I'm going off into another conversation which isn't about you, but it's relevant for the people listening to this who are all either going to be business owners or who are looking to get into business and one day will need some kind of exit. But the hair salon as analogy is absolutely perfect. It's like when someone sells a hair salon or when they move on, they take their client base with them. So
Mm.
if you're like if you they can move to the other side of the city and they will drain the clients with them. So you're not really with the hair salon, you're really only buying you're not buying the loyalty of the client because that client will go with the stylist or with the
Yeah.
guy that's lady or man that's cutting their hair. You're just buying a chair and a mirror and a sink
Mm.
fundamentally.
Mm.
And that's why they're really challenging businesses to value.
Mm.
But I guess you're absolutely right when you say all your reading is about it's absolutely right. It's like good business ownership, to my mind, is one where the business owner has been the inspiration, has got the business running, has created the process, and has created a reliable, sustainable business that someone can acquire
Mm.
without too much involvement of the business owner.
Yeah.
Um, I think in your business,
Very true.
in your business I mean in advertising, it was always about mergers, wasn't it? When I loved the whole like 80s, 90s advertising world. I was always fascinated by these names,
Mm.
how they always like became conjoined and
Yeah.
somebody like, oh, and some of these were like legends, like some of them would be like creative legends,
Yeah.
you know, Hegarty and and
Yeah.
all of these various names, obviously Saatchi and various. Um, is that something you think about, like an exit?
Um, well, I think I'm absolutely thinking in your line as well, which is get myself into a position. So one thing
Because,
that
because sorry,
we've got
just to
to,
interject, if you do, you don't actually have to sell the business either.
no, no,
That's
right.
that's the beautiful thing. Like
Yeah.
like I'm got myself into such a luxurious position right now in it, and it's conscious. Like I've consciously uncoupled myself from being integral to the business, right? And then you have the choice. You can sell it or you don't have to sell it. You
Yeah.
can just because my challenge now, right now, as an owner is if I sold it, what would I do? I kind of quite like being the sort of the guy that in the business that strategically says, why don't we go for this? Why don't we go for that? Why don't we try this? Why don't we try this product or service? We need to do something here. We need to do something there. And that's kind of like and I'm getting paid for being having a full-time job, if that makes
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you don't actually have to sell it once you get to that position.
No, and I think what happened was in the sort of in the middle section of the business's lifespan, I've always had a slightly sort of neurotic offering of wanting to do the creative and the brand, but as a business model needing the ecom bit. And I like the sort of relatively passive income in that it's not I'm not doing it all day, and it's web support and ecom support. But it did sort of slightly split like the business because it was kind of like when we spoke to some clients that go, is it brand and creative? Because you're saying you do shoots and you're going to do our brand ID and all this, or is it the e-com solution? And I basically sort of cooled right down on doing any kind of brand identity and actual creative direction. I might have one or two clients that I just do it, but I never market it, and I'll just do two a year, and it's now just pure play on that e-com side. So you'll see on our website, there's no real talk of creative direction. 2 years ago they would have been, and now that's gone. Um, and it's freed me. I now do my creative pursuit as like hobbies, and I do that. So I've got a very clear focus now on what the business is and how to build it up. And to your point, actually, sort of kind of take myself out of it. I still think I've got a lot to give, but that's maybe just helping the internal teams rather than actual I don't need to be the face of the business, despite the name. Like, it sounds like it's a big vanity project, and I'm Mr. Ego. It's like it's not at all. I'm very yeah. I really enjoy watching the team grow, and I really enjoy watching staff develop and helping that happen. I love that piece. It's very rewarding, and it's also really rewarding knowing that through the lifespan of the 10 to 12 years, I've probably helped maybe 30, 40 people put up mortgages. And that's like, I've taken that on. Again, it's not an egotistical thing I'm saying. I just feel very proud that I've contributed
Uh, I
and sort of
understand that.
built,
I'm in a
you know,
complete agreement with that, and I think you're a responsible business owner, as I am, as my brother is. Is like we, I always joke that I could have been richer if I'd been more selfish. But that where would the fun have been in that? Because I think we've run our business in a similar vein, which was we've been more like encouraging of. And actually, I don't know what you're like when you hire people, but when I hire someone, the first thing I say in the interview is, "You're only going to be here for 2 or 3 years, and at that point, you'll either cash in your experience and get a bigger, better paid job, or we will be forced to pitch to keep you." And I say
yeah,
that in the beginning of every interview. And people are always surprised. They're like, wow, that's refreshing. I said, because it's true. Because after we've got some people that after 2 or 3 years, because our strategy was always employ young and hungry and
mm.
inverted commas cheap, right? And give them a lot more experience than they would normally have.
That's exactly how I play it. Exactly.
And then after 2 or 3 years, that person has the option to go and cash in their chips quite well and get a much better paid job. Like, and I'm like, my work is that why does that help us as well? It's because they're leaving their business unit or the business they've built up behind them in a much better place for someone, no offense, cheaper to come in and do the job. So everyone wins. You go and cash in your chips and double your salary or get 50% increase on your salary. By the way, in those 2, 3 years, that person's salary's done that, right?
Yeah.
And now, once you've flown the nest and got 50% more salary, you've done so on the basis that I can now rehire someone to do your job at this salary point here and
Mm.
do the same, and then the same cycle happens. Or we pitch for you to keep you, and we've got people that've been there 10 years, 15 years.
I think it's not all about cheap though either, because I've hired experienced people with 5 to 8 years
I mean,
experience.
cheap's the wrong word. That's
Yeah,
my bad. Value, like
yeah. No,
it.
but it is. There is. It's an open thing that if you're going to get either a graduate or someone with 18 months experience, you're looking really for hunger and desire, as because I've tried doing it on somebody with 8 years, and actually they're a rock, and it's kind of like it's very hard to sort of to get the chisel out and create change. It's just, you know, I, you and I as business owners with quite sort of compact businesses know that basically there's a way of done it with doing this because we've done it for 10 years, but we also want the enthusiasm of somebody who can bring some fresh ideas to it. What we don't need is somebody who's got 8 years experience saying the process you're doing here is all wrong, but I don't really have the ideas I got from Microsoft. And you're sort of thinking that isn't, yeah, it's just, so I'm using an example, but it's kind of, you love energy and enthusiasm and fresh ideas that are trends that I just don't know from younger generations. Couldn't tell you anything about TikTok. Couldn't tell you. There's value, to your point, that's being brought into the business that's fresh and dynamic, and that comes from youth.
But finally, one last thing. What advice do you give to other people that are looking to get into business generally, or specifically what you do? I don't know whether specifically within your sector there is it an intense marketplace? Do people want to get into what you're doing, or is that kind of competitive? Is it a competitive landscape? What you do?
I think what's really, yeah, very. I mean, it's super competitive and it's got more and more. I mean, when I started 12 years ago, we were probably the first people like, trying it out. And now it's kind of mega saturated and you'll see it on LinkedIn or you see it in other channels. People can sort of become an expert after 6 months. So it can all happen. You're sort of competing against a sort of perceived market of I've got 12 years, that person's got 6 months, but they may get it because actually they want somebody who's young and I look a little bit like I'm all over the hill. But
So, so do you find that when you're pitching for a client that you're up against the kind of the young Turks, the kind of
a
kids,
little
new
bit,
kids
but
off
I
the block?
don't, I mean, I've also decided I mean, there's pitches and there's pitches, isn't there? I mean, I think if you're in the old world, you'd be, we don't pitch. We basically just go, we're here if you want us. And this is what we've done with the other people. We'd love to work with you. I
So,
don't really
so,
want
so,
it.
so much of your business, as with all the people that I've talked to, and I mean, I talked to a guy that ran a jacket potato business in Sutton Coldfield, who's a guy called Justin, who effectively was saying exactly the same thing as the guys that ran a post production studio in film and TV. And so what you're saying is they didn't really have to pitch. They didn't really have to sell. It's a lot of it's been word of mouth. Is that as
Yeah.
you found that's been the case with your business?
Yeah, 100%. And also being quite niche in our category. We're sort of luxury premium fashion and in that network, we've built up a good sort of base. And I think that, yeah, I don't really, if I got a call up from BMW tomorrow and said, we're going to put you in a tender with three other agencies, I'd probably say it just doesn't really feel right for us. But I mean, maybe 10 years ago, I would have been just like up all night trying to scramble around to win that piece of work. And now I just feel like it's not as exciting. You won't believe it, BMW, but that's not as exciting as you think it is. So yeah, I think we don't, we're very lucky that we don't really pitch. And I can't remember what your other question
No,
was.
the advice was really,
The
and this is
advice.
like the
Got the
advice is
advice.
to like someone who's coming into. I mean, I don't know why you would advise a future competitor, but what advice do you give someone coming into this? Because obviously a lot of people come into it, get burnt, and disappear. What's and I guess it's sort of links with the general advice of what success means as a business owner. Um,
I think for me, one thing that I've felt is that and this sounds like a cliche, it sounds so obvious, but it isn't that obvious. But I think it's really important that whatever you decide you want to do isn't just a unique point of difference in the market, but it's something that you love. You can see people coming out of MBA and say, I've found that like, there's a pair, we've designed this new pair of like gloves which have this other bit of Velcro, does this, does that, and you're kind of like, yeah. I mean, do I want to be in the glove? I mean, actually, gloves isn't that bad, but there are some, you could be into like loo roll that rolls that way, but we've designed it going that way, and we think we're going to crack it, and you just kind of think, do you want to be in loo roll for the next 10 years? Because and I suppose for me, it feels like it's so important that you wake up just thinking, I do actually love the idea of working on this piece of work today. Or if it's a dry subject, which is totally fine, and it's like we just sell nails, there's something dynamic about it, whether it's the culture of the team or if it's like the location or whatever it is that just makes you feel energized about it. So just making sure that you've got the energy because it's as you know, it's like there are lots of pillars to this. There's staff, there's low holidays, there's this, there's that's the, and I think if you just know fundamentally that there's a sort of love. I'm not. It's never going to be deep love, but it's like I like this more. Would I ever want to do it another way? I don't think I would.
yeah.
So yeah. And the beauty of an agency is that you're swapping it out. If like it's today it's skincare, tomorrow it's pasta, and it's kind of like that feels like you've got a very rich world. And I love that. It's just part of how my brain ticks. But yeah.
Barney, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. And at some moments, I didn't feel it was an interview at all, but just a very honest conversation. So, and I really appreciate that. And everyone that I've managed to interview has just been authentic. And I think what's wonderful about you and your business is that there seems to be this alignment between your authentic approach to business and the business that you've created. So, congratulations on the success of your business thus far, and wish you the very best, Barney, with the future endeavors. And I hope to meet you one day soon.
Thank you, Marcus. That was really great fun and great to meet you. We will meet soon.
We will. Bye
Yeah.
bye, Barney.
Cheers. Bye bye.